"We don't seat walk-ins who look like they've wandered in off the trail," said Darlene Cruz without lowering her voice, standing in the entry of the Birchwood dining room with her arms crossed and her eyes already moving past Stuart Mackay toward the group coming through the lobby behind him. She had taken in his faded flannel jacket and worn canvas trousers and reached her verdict in approximately 2 seconds. Beside him, his 7-year-old daughter Tilda gripped his hand with both of hers and said nothing, though her chin tucked slightly toward her chest the way it always did when she felt uncertain about a room. Stuart did not argue. He looked past Darlene into the dining room. At the long sassos overlooking the lake, at the birchwood chairs and white tablecloths, and the small wildflower arrangements Ruth had once argued with a supplier about for an entire afternoon because she wanted local blooms, not imported ones, and she did not think this was an unreasonable request. He looked at the corner table nearest the window, where the evening light came through a certain way after 6 o'clock and turned the surface of the lake to copper. That had been Ruth's favorite hour. She had chosen the table's placement herself, standing in the unfinished room with blueprints rolled under her arm, telling the contractor exactly how many centimeters closer to the glass it needed to be. His reservation was confirmed. He had booked the corner table under the name Stuart Walsh. He had booked it because Tilda had asked 3 weeks ago, in the quiet way she had when she was asking something she'd been working up to for a while, whether they could go back to the place where Mum used to like sitting by the water. He had said yes. The woman blocking the entrance had no idea that the man in the flannel jacket owned Birchwood Manor, the 200 acres it sat on, and the hospitality company whose name appeared on every payroll check in the building. Stuart had not planned to tell her. Not yet. Not until he had seen everything he needed to see. For nearly a month, Stuart Mackay had been reading the same complaint in different handwriting. Guests described rooms that weren't ready when promised, fees that appeared on bills without explanation, a coldness at the front desk that multiple people compared, almost word for word, to being made to feel like a bother. Several longtime staff members had resigned without detailed explanations. The online reviews were peculiar in a specific way. They praised the lake, the architecture, the timber ceiling. Then they trailed off into phrases like the staff seemed to have already decided we weren't their kind of guests. Birchwood Manor had been Stuart's project for 12 years. He and Ruth had built it from a cleared shoreline and a stack of drawings they'd revised 17 times on the kitchen table. Ruth had designed the dining room. She had insisted on the ceiling height because she said it made the room feel like the building had grown there rather than been set down. She had insisted on local wildflowers. She had stood in the empty shell of the main lounge and pointed at the north wall and said the emergency equipment goes there, framed properly, because I will not have people hunting for a defibrillator in a crisis. And Stuart had agreed, and they had had a cedar panel made to house it. Ruth had died 2 years ago in April without warning, a brain aneurysm, one moment and then not. Stuart had stepped away from the company for the better part of a year. He had trusted the reports that Clifton Weir, the resort's general manager, submitted each month. Immaculate documents, perfectly formatted satisfaction scores that glowed like something manufactured rather than measured. When complaints began arriving through channels Clifton couldn't control, a tourism board contact, a former employee who emailed the corporate office directly, a guest review platform, Stuart had understood that the reports were a fiction. He needed to see how deep the fiction went. And he could not call ahead, because if Clifton knew he was coming, every surface would be polished and every employee would perform. He had explained to Tilda, on the drive north from Toronto through the autumn birches, that they were going somewhere Mum had loved very much, and that he wanted to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Tilda had looked at him with the calm gravity that 7-year-olds sometimes carry. Are we pretending to be different people? We're being exactly who we are, he told her. We're just not mentioning anything extra. She thought about this, then said she understood and went back to her book. They arrived in the early evening when the lake was going gray and the maples along the drive had turned the color of old brick. A bellman in a burgundy jacket stood at the entrance, but stepped toward a couple arriving in a silver SUV without acknowledging Stuart or the worn duffel bag at his feet. Stuart carried the bag himself. Tilda walked beside him and pointed at the heron standing motionless on the dock as if it had been placed there as decoration. The lobby was as he remembered it, vaulted ceiling, stone fireplace, the cedar smell that had always made the building feel alive in some way, but something was different, not a surface thing. The warmth was gone. The front desk clerk finished a personal message on her phone before acknowledging him. She typed at the keyboard for a long time, frowning, and then said the room wasn't showing as ready. Stuart showed her the confirmation email. She typed some more. She said there might be a delay. How long? We'll let you know. She turned to the couple from the SUV without another word. Their room was arranged in under 3 minutes. Stuart took Tilda to a bench near the window. No one brought them water. Staff walked past them 3 times without acknowledgement. Tilda watched a family of ducks along the dock. Do they know we're here? She asked eventually. The people at the desk. Stuart watched the clerk laughing with the SUV couple, leaning across the counter in the warm way she had not once used with him. They know, he said. While they waited, he noted other things. An older man at the desk being told that a charge on his bill was a mandatory resort fee and could not be removed, his confusion dismissed before he finished his sentence. A maintenance worker redirected to the side entrance because his uniform wasn't the right kind for the lobby. A family's noise complaint written on a sticky note and tucked under a keyboard not entered into the system. These were not errors. They were fluent habits. The whole building spoke this language and had for some time. 20 minutes in, a young kitchen worker came through the lobby with a tray of glasses for the bar and stopped when she saw Tilda sitting in her raincoat on the cold bench. She went back to the kitchen and returned a few minutes later carrying a mug of hot chocolate, which she set in front of Tilda with a careful, unhurried movement, as though she was trying not to make anything of it. It's a bit cold out here tonight, she said, her badge read Bev. Tilda looked at her with the particular relief she showed when something genuinely helped and said thank you in a very serious voice. Before Stuart could speak, a sharp sound came from behind the front desk. Darlene Cruz had come around the counter. What are you doing out here? Bev straightened. The girl's been waiting a long time. She looked cold. Your station is kitchen prep. Go back. Darlene looked at the mug of hot chocolate, then at Stuart without expression. Requests for service should come through the desk. Bev lowered her eyes and went back. Stuart watched her go and remembered her name. When the room was finally ready, he settled Tilda in with her book and her stuffed rabbit, and told her they were going to the dining room now. She looked up with a particular brightness that had been mostly absent for 2 years. Can we sit at Mum's table, she asked, the one by the water? Stuart had reserved it. The corner window table, confirmed that morning, had been specifically requested in the booking. That's exactly where we're going, he said. The dining room hostess found the reservation, and then Darlene appeared at her shoulder, glanced at Stuart's jacket, and said in a level voice that the corner table was being held for another party. I booked that table specifically, Stuart said. Reservations are subject to seating arrangement. I can offer you a table near the back. He looked past her. The corner table was empty. The 2 tables beside it were empty. More than half the room was not full. The confirmation lists the corner window table, he said. The table is being held. Her voice was the flat, practiced kind that had said this many times to many people she had already dismissed. Tilda moved forward slightly to see past the hostess stand. Dad, she said, is that Mum's table? The one with the small lamp? Stuart looked at the corner table. Ruth had requested the small lamp there specifically because she said overhead lighting made dinner feel like a staff meeting. The lamp was still there, casting an amber circle on the white cloth. The table was empty. That's the one, he said quietly. At that moment, 4 people came through the entrance in expensive outdoor wear, the kind that had never seen actual outdoor use. One of the men spoke to Darlene like an old acquaintance and said they didn't have a reservation but hoped she could work something out. Darlene's whole bearing shifted. Her shoulders dropped. Her voice found a warmth it had not contained once since Stuart arrived. Of course, she said, right this way. She led them to the corner table. A server appeared immediately with menus and the candle and the small stem in a narrow vase that had been Ruth's specification, changed each morning because Ruth had believed even small tables deserved something living on them. Tilda watched them walk to the table. She watched them settle in. She watched the server arrive and the champagne flutes appear and the lamp glow over the cloth where her mother had once sat with an infant on her knee, whispering to Stuart that someday their daughter would grow up knowing that this lake existed and that it was beautiful and that it was theirs. They gave Mum's table away, Tilda said. Stuart put a hand on her shoulder. Her voice was very careful. Is it because of your jacket? He crouched so they were level. He looked at her directly. No, there is nothing wrong with my jacket, and there is nothing wrong with us. Then why won't they let us in? He had been trying to protect her from a particular lesson for 2 years, but she was already seeing it. Children always did, before adults had decided how to package it. Because some people decide who matters by what they can see, he said, and they get it badly wrong. Tilda was quiet then. Would they treat you differently if they knew who you were? Stuart looked at Darlene, standing at the hostess stand with her tablet, with the absolute self-possession of someone who had never once been asked to account for herself. That, he said, is exactly what I came here to find out. They were still standing near the entrance when Bev appeared from the service corridor with a small basket of rolls and 2 glasses of apple juice on a tray. She had seen what happened from the kitchen pass. She set the tray on the nearest surface and said quietly, "Just while you wait." Darlene was across the floor in 4 steps. She picked up the tray and held it away. Who authorized this? Bev kept her voice even. They've been standing here since before dinner service. They have a confirmed reservation. You are not authorized to serve guests who haven't been seated. There are tables available. Your job, Darlene said loudly enough that the nearest tables turned, is to follow direction, not question it. She looked at Stuart. Guests who need more than we can offer are welcome to find alternative dining. There are options in town. Stuart met her eyes. Tell me what policy this is specifically. Birchwood maintains a certain standard of experience. Is that written anywhere? It doesn't need to be. Then who decides what the standard is? She held his gaze for one moment, then her eyes dropped just briefly to his jacket. That was the answer. Stuart asked to speak with the general manager. Clifton Ware emerged from the private lounge 10 minutes later wearing a blazer with the resort crest on the pocket and the easy confidence of someone who had managed every difficult guest by deciding the guest was the problem. Darlene spoke to him for 30 seconds before he crossed to Stuart. He did not ask for Stuart's account of events. He glanced at Tilda at the bag near the wall, and his expression settled into something he probably thought looked reasonable. "Mr. Walsh," he said, "it sounds like there's been a miscommunication about seating." "There hasn't. My reservation was reassigned." "That occasionally happens with high-demand tables. I'd like to offer you a complimentary." "I'd like the table I reserved." Something behind Clifton's smile shifted. He reached into his jacket, took out a folded set of bills, and held them towards Stuart with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. "The Westport Grill is about 12 minutes down the road," he said. "One of our staff can show you to the side exit if that's easier." Stuart looked at the money, then at Tilda, who was watching Clifton with the focused attention she gave to things she was trying to understand. "The side exit," Stuart said. "The main driveway gets congested. You want us to leave through the service corridor." Clifton leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice to the register people use when they know they're saying something wrong but have decided to say it anyway. "Birchwood provides a specific kind of experience. That's the value proposition. We can't extend the same exceptions to every situation that presents itself." He paused. "You understand." Stuart understood everything. He was standing in a building he had designed from the ground up, in a dining room his wife had argued about with a contractor until she got the table placement right, being told to leave through the service door while his daughter stood beside him. He was hearing the person entrusted to protect what he and Ruth had built explain that the word exception applied to people like them. He put the bills back in Clifton's breast pocket. "Keep it," Stuart said. "You may need it very shortly." Then a glass shattered in the main lounge, and a woman's voice rose sharply, and the sound that cuts through a room designed to insulate people from reality came through every wall. Someone calling out that they needed help, right now, that something was wrong. Stuart moved before anyone else did. In the main lounge, an elderly man had collapsed sideways in his chair. His wife was kneeling beside him with both hands on his chest, saying his name. A ring of guests stood back at a cautious distance, unsure. A bartender held a glass he had not put down. "Call emergency services," Stuart said. The server nearest the house phone reached for it. Bev was already on her mobile, speaking to a dispatcher with a clarity that suggested she had taken a first aid course and actually paid attention. Stuart reached the man and checked his breathing. His pulse was faint and his color was going gray. "Is there an AED on this floor?" someone called from the back of the room. There was. Stuart knew exactly where it was because he had put it there. He and Ruth had gone back and forth with the original designer about emergency equipment. Ruth had said it needed to be accessible, not decorative, and when the designer suggested a cabinet near the coat check, Ruth had said that was too far and chosen the north wall of the lounge instead. They had framed it behind the carved cedar panel to the left of the fireplace, with a quick-release latch anyone could open in under 2 seconds. North wall, Stuart said. Left of the fireplace, carved cedar panel. Lift the left corner. Nobody moved for a moment. Now, he said. A young server ran, found it, and was back in seconds. Stuart directed the procedure with the servers shaking hands doing the work. Bev relayed information to the dispatcher in a steady voice. Clifton stood in the lounge doorway. Stuart felt him watching. The ambulance needs the north loading entrance, Stuart said without turning around. The main driveway has a delivery truck on it this time of evening. The service corridor from the north side goes directly to the elevator on the left. Someone needs to go down and hold the doors open. A bellman turned to Clifton for direction. Clifton said go. He was looking at Stuart differently now. The man's name was Arnold Turcotte. Stuart learned this later, a retired postal worker from Sudbury, who had been coming to Birchwood Manor for 23 years. His color came back slowly over the following minutes. By the time paramedics came through the service corridor exactly as Stuart had anticipated, Arnold could speak in short sentences, and the fear in his wife's face had begun to ease into something that was mostly relief. She caught Stuart's sleeve before the paramedics moved her aside. You knew where everything was, she said. You knew the building. Stuart said they'd take good care of him. After Arnold was taken out, the lounge went quiet in the way of a room that has been reminded of something it had been designed to make easy to forget. Clifton approached Stuart near the fireplace. His voice lost its earlier evenness. You knew about that panel, he said. Yes. That's not in the guest guide. No. Clifton stared at him. So how? Contact your legal and compliance officer, Stuart said. Ask them to come here now. Also, the complaint database and the guest review files were transferred to an external server at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The records that were altered before submission to the corporate office have been preserved in their original form. Your administrative access to the resort management system has been revoked. The color left Clifton's face in a way that was surprisingly complete. Darlene, who had followed from the dining room, said, Who are you? There was a photograph on the lounge wall beside the fireplace, wide, framed in maple, taken on opening night. Stuart was in it, younger, tired in the way of someone who has spent 2 years building something and hasn't slept properly. Ruth stood beside him, laughing at something off camera, her hand on his arm. Behind them both was the carved cedar panel and the wildflower arrangement on the mantel, and the timber ceiling Ruth had argued for. Tilda came to stand beside Stuart. She looked at the photograph, then she looked at her father. She pointed at the man in the photograph. That's Dad, she said. Then she pointed at the woman beside him. And that's Mum. Darlene looked at the photograph. She looked at the cedar panel. She looked at the wildflowers on the mantel and the lamp casting its amber circle and the timber ceiling above her head, and the understanding moved across her face like something falling from a height. Not clean, not instant, just the slow, terrible arrival of where she had landed. Her tablet hit the floor. Clifton straightened his jacket. The gesture was automatic and achieved nothing, and was somehow the emptiest thing Stuart had seen all evening. Harriet Poole, Stuart's compliance officer, came through the lounge entrance carrying a folder. She had driven from Toronto that afternoon and waited in a room down the hall. She walked past Clifton without acknowledgement and stopped in front of Stuart and said that the complete records had been secured, the original complaint logs restored, and the team was ready when he was. Every staff member in the room recognized her from the quarterly all-hands calls. Clifton and Darlene were escorted from the property within the hour. 3 supervisors connected to the falsified records were suspended pending investigation. Stuart addressed the remaining staff without anger, in the measured tone of someone who has already made every decision and is simply now delivering them clearly. He told them he would not hold every person in the building responsible for what leadership had done. He told them he would also not pretend the culture had grown on its own. He looked at Bev Kowalczyk, who stood near the kitchen entrance with her arms at her sides and her chin slightly up, in the posture of someone bracing for a verdict. He told the room that Bev would not lose her position. The hours taken from her in retaliation would be restored. The income she had lost would be repaid. She would be enrolled in the resort's management development program, which had somehow not been offered to her in 3 years. Despite her being the only person in the building who had, twice, tried to report what was happening to her and been told to mind her station. Bev looked at the floor for a moment, then she looked up. She didn't say anything, she nodded once. That was enough. Stuart found Arnold Turcotte near the main entrance with a foil blanket around his shoulders, waiting in the quiet way of a man accustomed to waiting, his wife beside him speaking in a low voice with one of the paramedics who had stayed behind. Stuart sat beside him and said he was sorry. Arnold shook his head. You weren't the one who turned us away. The business is mine. What happens in it is mine to answer for. Arnold was quiet for a moment. Then he said that his wife Margaret had found Birchwood Manor by accident 23 years ago. They had taken a wrong turn in Muskoka and ended up on the resort road, and they couldn't afford it that year, so they had saved up and come back the following autumn. They had made it a tradition. After Margaret died, 4 years ago quickly, the way those things sometimes go, Arnold had kept coming alone because stopping felt like a decision he wasn't ready to make. She would have liked knowing who built the place, Arnold said. She always thought someone had paid attention to the details. Stuart looked at the wildflower arrangement on the check-in desk, Ruth's specification down to the height of the vase. Someone did, he said. He invited Arnold to the corner window table for dinner. Arnold said he didn't want to cause any trouble. Stuart told him it was the opposite of trouble. They ate together, Stuart and Tilda and Arnold, while the lake went dark outside the windows. Arnold set a small photograph of Margaret against the water glass. Stuart took a photograph of Ruth from his wallet and placed it beside Arnold's. Tilda looked at both photographs for a while. Then she said, looking at the water, I think Mum would have liked him. Arnold said quietly that he thought the same went the other direction. After that, none of them spoke for a time. The dining room settled around them. Cutlery, low voices, the sound of water somewhere beyond the glass. The wildflowers were on the table. The small lamp cast its amber circle. It was the hour Ruth had always loved, when the light held on above the lake just long enough to matter before it was gone. In the weeks that followed, Stuart changed everything that needed changing. Guest complaints were routed to an independent system with no management access. Employees were given a protected channel for reporting concerns without risk of losing shifts. Every service policy was written down and applied without exception to every person who came through the door, regardless of what they were wearing or how they arrived. Training budgets were restored. Kitchen allergy protocols, shortened systematically over the previous 2 years, Harriet's report confirmed, were rebuilt and made mandatory for every service staff member. The main private dining room, which had been named after the resort's founding year, was quietly renamed. Stuart had a small plaque made in maple and cedar and installed it beside the entrance one morning before the room opened. The Ruth Room, it read, built with care, for the person who made this place worth building. On an evening in late October, when the maples had shed most of their leaves and the lake had gone the flat silver of approaching winter, Stuart and Tilda stood near the main entrance as a man came through the door in a contractor's jacket with a young daughter beside him. They came in out of the cold with the careful posture of people who are not entirely sure they belong somewhere this polished. The man paused just inside the entrance. His daughter looked at the fireplace. Bev came from behind the desk. She walked toward them with the particular warmth that is not performed, the kind that comes from having once stood on the other side of a front desk, uncertain and knowing exactly what the moment costs a person. Welcome to Birchwood Manor, she said. Let me show you to your room. The man's shoulders came down. His daughter stopped hesitating and walked forward. Tilda slipped her hand into Stuart's. She looked toward the private dining room where her mother's name was now beside the door, and then up at her father, and Stuart held her hand and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. The lake was dark and cold beyond the windows. The resort was warm and lit, and Bev was leading the family through the lobby with the ease of someone who had decided, somewhere along the way, that the most important thing she could offer another person was the simple and unambiguous message that they were welcome here, and that they were seen.